If Kelly had the graveyard slot, then I guess that makes this the wake. So enjoy the tea and the cucumber sandwiches. So I think I can say without fear of contradiction that we live in a world that is pretty complex, febrile, and fragmented. But I would argue that there is actually one thing that unites all of us, one experience, which is that every morning, before we've even opened our eyes, or barely having opened our eyes, we've started doom scrolling through our socials and checking our news feeds. And as this is the AMEC Summit, I wanted to just do a little bit of very, very unscientific research. So put your hand up if in the morning, once you've done that, this is broadly how you feel. Your socials, your news feed, you wake up feeling like this. Good, this is going exact. Oh, come on. Two people are pretending they enjoy their morning scrolling. For the honest people amongst you, who feels rather more like this once they've finished their news feeds and their socials? Good. So that's 86% of you agreed with my core premise. Obviously, I just fixed the data, but that's okay. So the reason I say that is because that sense of disquiet, of unease, is our current reality, both professionally and personally. And it's that sense of angst and anxiety and how we can rise to the challenges that it presents that are the focus of what I'm going to talk about today, through the lens, as Jonna says, of a report I released only yesterday morning called Reputation, Risk and Resilience, Where Are We Now and What Happens Next? So what I'm going to cover, is my chest mic on or am I on this? Can you hear me both? I'm on mine. Good, I can do both. So I'm going to be exploring the volatile, complex, fast-moving environment that we live in and how we can respond to it. I'll be examining the key findings and practical recommendations from the report, all around a central, powerful theme, which I've called Assuming Agency and Achieving Balance in the Age of Angst and Rage. Yes, the alliteration did some very heavy lifting there, you're correct. And I'm going to challenge you, as predominantly people who work in the area of measurement and evaluation, to consider the role of effective measurement in mitigating risk, building resilience, and providing a high-impact response to what I do day to day, which is issues and full-blown crises. And at the core will be a fundamental question, which is this: how do we manage reputational and relationship risk, and that is crucial, unlock the tangible upside value involved amid ever-increasing flux and uncertainty? But before I do, I'll give you a bit of context as to how and why do I do this report. So, as I say, the world's gone, as we Brits would say, it's slightly blooming nuts. Everything's gone a bit crazy. We get to the end of each year, we breathe a sigh of relief, and we think, great, I can power down, spend time with family and friends, and recharge, and get ready for the year that lies ahead. And by the 5th of January, it's all started again. And this year, Donald Trump literally walked into Venezuela, and I felt very validated, but not in a happy way. I don't need to tell you the ways in which the world has become complex and volatile. You doubtless all know the acronym VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, from the US military. You can't turn around in a room anymore without someone having coined a new version of that. I quite like RUPT for the Centre for Creative Leadership: rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. Ipsos have been talking about polycrisis and the New World Disorder. A couple of years ago in the UK, Collins Dictionary made permacrisis their word of the year. And it's almost as if Murphy's Law, ironic that we're in Ireland, that if something can go wrong, it probably will, has become hardwired. Now, you're probably sitting there going, God, this is the 4 o'clock slot. You're meant to be energizing and cheery. I say this not to be doom-laden, because this is our current reality, professionally and personally. And it's also the reality that 3 years ago, when I was ploughing through about 300 pages of reports that came out before Davos, and I said to myself, oh God, why has no one just summarised this stuff? And a little voice, I remember it vividly, said to me, what a cracking idea, Rod, why don't you do that? So I thanked the voice for ruining the next 6 weeks of my life. And I produced what has now become an annual endeavour, then called Trust, Risk and Resilience, now called Reputation, Risk and Resilience, which, as I say, is a summary of all the major reports on those interrelated topics, drawing out the 10 key themes that run like a red thread between them, and providing 10 practical recommendations. So that's this year's report. I'll put the QR code back up later on. Wouldn't miss an opportunity for you to be able to download it. It's free, just to be clear. So what has the report told us? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip through the 10 key themes that emerged this year. This is really just skirting the surface of what you'll find in the report. So the first, in no particular order, is that economics has got very political. Geoeconomics basically has become the new geopolitics. We've seen a shift in the primary expression of geopolitical risk from the military and the diplomatic to the economic. So the World Economic Forum saw geoeconomic confrontation top their risk list for the first time in the many, many years they've been doing that report. Aon saw geopolitical volatility enter the top 10 for the first time in 19 years, rising a staggering 30 places. And Gallup's work on the world's most important problem found economic concerns top the list of national problems in 71 of 107 countries, driven, interestingly, not by abstract GDP numbers, but by people's day-to-day sense of whether they can pay the bills. Number two is that climate is producing a very deeply worrying paradox that across the 4 years, I'm consistently seeing the climate emergency dominant over the long term, but becoming less and less important over the short term. So to give you a couple of data points, in WEF's list, extreme weather is the #1 risk over 10 years. The top 5 over that horizon are all climate-related, and yet over 2 years, climate-related risks have fallen. AXA has climate topping its list for the 5th consecutive year, but it's down to 55% of people who have it in their top 5, and only 12%, just over 1 in 10, believe that public authorities are adequately prepared. At the same time, the Business Continuity Institute in their Horizon Scan report found extreme weather as the single #1 cause of actual economic disruption, with Aon suggesting that in 2024 alone, the economic impact of climate-related events was nearly $370 billion. AI, interestingly, has been almost entirely absent or very low-key in recent years. Not this year, I can tell you. The potential adverse impacts of AI have gone from number 30 in WEF's 2-year list last year to being number 5 over a 10-year horizon. So what we're seeing is people starting to really feel that AI is coming up on the rails. The Conference Board, in their C-suite outlook, found leaders saying that AI is simultaneously their #1 investment priority and their greatest perceived threat, with AXA finding that just over 1 in 10 of risk experts believe that public authorities are prepared for AI risks. Gallup points to research that says 90% of global executives report no measurable impact on labor productivity. And Ipsos's Reputation Council report saw meaningful use of AI in our industry fall 15 percentage points in a single year, with only 11% of their respondents believing that their AI governance is adequate. So, of course, AI and GEO in all of its versions have been a major focus, but there are real questions about productivity, usage, and governance. Cyber has always been and will continue to be a major concern. And what the analysis finds this year is a really interesting, if you like, nexus of AI and cyber, which suggests that the threat is not just getting quantitatively worse, but qualitatively more dangerous. International SOS sees a 15% annual increase in ransomware attacks, deep fakes up 53%, the average cost of a data breach nearly $500 million. And yet, according to AXA, 80% of risk experts view public authorities as unprepared. Number 5, for me, is where it gets really interesting. Last year, I described what I called the rising epidemic of poor mental health and employee disengagement as a risk blind spot or a sleeping giant risk. And we've seen this year what I've called in this year's report the embedded psychological pandemic of skyrocketing poor mental health and plummeting employee engagement. So Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report saw global employee engagement fall for the second consecutive year to just 20%, its lowest since the pandemic. The cost to the global economy, $10 trillion, or 9% of global GDP. An international SOS estimates that there are 1 billion people living with poor mental health, and yet under 20%, 17% of leaders rate it as a top 3 concern. So as I say in the report, this psychological pandemic is not a welfare issue with productivity consequences. It's a productivity crisis with welfare and well-being origins. ESG, we've been talking about the death of ESG and DEI. I'm not going to quote Mark Twain at you, but it's a lot more nuanced than you might expect, with some very, very clear geographic fault lines. Ipsos found 80% of global corporate affairs leaders expecting ESG communication to become more tentative. Only a third believe that ESG is the right term, and yet half of global communicators see ESG as fundamentally changing how business operates. Oxford Globescan saw over 90% of respondents in Africa viewing it as a business opportunity, 53% in the US. Ipsos came up with what I view as one of the most eye-catching phrases of the last year, which is the rise of strategic silence, where 1 in 5 CCOs prefer to speak out, just under a third believe in staying quiet, and nearly half say the decision is situational. So put simply, ESG and DEI aren't dying, they are bifurcating. Acronyms are quietly being shown the door, and the core principles are being embedded more deeply than ever. Moving from individual themes to 3 final cross-cutting ones. And as I said at the beginning, we find a world more divided, fragmented, and insular than ever before. Edelman's Trust Barometer talks about a move from last year's crisis of grievance to a crisis of insularity, with 70% of global respondents hesitant or unwilling to trust anyone who differs from them in values, information sources, or background. Richard Edelman says people have pulled back from alarm and anger into the hard shell of insularity. AXA finds 10% of the general population believe that their country shares common values. WEF has societal polarization at number 4 over 1 year and number 3 over 2 years, and they talk about streets versus elites. And Page Harris, their work on business confidence, finds the differences on key issues are far more marked between generations than between countries, with Gen Zs and Boomers diverging more than any 2 countries in their data set. if you pin me to a wall and ask me to pick one, it would be the question of risk, convergence, interconnectedness, and what I last year called risk intersectionality. International SOS found that nearly 60% of their respondents said that new risks are emerging faster than their organizations are capable of handling. And they say that the siloed response structures most organizations have built are simply not equipped for simultaneous intersecting threats. And Aon notes that its 4 interconnecting mega trends, technology, trade, weather and workforce, never arrive one at a time. I love that phrase. Penultimately, we have what I call an awareness versus preparedness gap. And this isn't me just as a comms person going, oh, we should be better prepared. The data tell the story. Aon found that only 14% of organizations quantify their exposure to their own top 10 risks. International SOS, going back to them, said that 80% of risk leaders know that faster detection would improve outcomes, but only 20% can verify their risk information. And according to Paige Harris, 61% view it as very important for leading companies to create economic impact for everyone, but only 31% have confidence that they will. And to quote Rochelle Ford, CEO of Page Society, she says, confidence that companies can deliver remains low because most people don't see or understand what businesses are doing or why it matters, visibility and context. And finally, and this is perhaps my greatest article of faith, is that we are seeing a very deep-seated blind spot related to risks centered around us, human beings, which I've called the human infrastructure deficit. Safety and health incidents are top of the BCI's list of actual sources of disruption, and yet they sit 16th and 19th in respondents' forward planning. Aon finds that absenteeism is the #1 cause of actual financial loss, and yet it sits 39th in the risk rankings. Gallup notes that the limited ROI on AI investment in terms of delivering productivity gains is, they say, not a technology problem, it's a human one. And Oxford Globescan point to corporate affairs leaders returning to what they call the most human strategies of direct engagement, face-to-face relationship building. And this is not nostalgia. This is a rational response to an environment where every other form of connection is arguably under strain. So there's a red thread running through the red threads, which is that we can't control what is happening out there. We can't control the stimuli. But what we can control is our response to them. And as we'll see in a second, that requires agency and it requires balance. So shifting on to the solution, or some suggestions on the solution, that the National Preparedness Commission in the UK talks about not just admiring problems, but acting on them. And I've always been determined to provide practical suggestions. And as I said, I've done so this year within a single organizing concept of assuming agency paired with achieving balance, a sort of yin and yang set of pairings which are central to delivering that assumption of agency. But what do I mean by assuming agency? Well, one of the key findings from the data this year and from my own conversations with clients and colleagues is that people feel they've lost control. But being a little bit provocative, I think control has always been an illusion. The idea of controlling the message or controlling the narrative has been outdated for years. What we can do is influence. And my argument is that influence depends on agency. Jim McNamara quietly used Latin, so I don't feel too bad in reminding you that the word agency comes from the Latin agere, meaning to do, to act, or to drive. So what I mean by agency is a fundamental cultural mindset, a conscious, cultivated disposition towards ownership and towards action across the entire issues and crisis life cycle. Deliberate, intentional, and adopted early, not as a rearguard action. And to quote the brilliant Catherine Arrow, based in New Zealand, in a report she brought out, she said, "We have to get on with something. We need to act. Inaction is not an option." So what I've done then is placed all of this year's recommendations within what I've called the agency cycle. Let's quickly look at them. Context. All issues management and crisis comms is intensely contextual. No two crises are the same. And the first act of agency is developing a really full understanding of the context of what is happening, corporate, cultural, geographic, and political. But without that, even the best laid plans will be ineffective. And it's no coincidence that at Harvard Business School they teach you that competitive advantage stems from a mastery of context. So the first question I ask is, do you have the systems, processes, and tools needed to rapidly analyze and understand context, backed by the agile curiosity required to gauge those all-important nuances between the lines of the data and the analytical insights? Number two is what I call development and trigger. Understanding what has happened or is happening or could happen and why is essential. Because very often it's the causal trigger that's more important than the event itself, particularly if you like the reputation bump hasn't yet gone off. And it's sometimes possible to lengthen the fuse or even extinguish it. So the next question is whether your issues and crisis preparedness and your live fire issues handling is specifically designed to rapidly establish the what, when, who, where, and why facts, pin down causality, and slow the fuse on any potential reputational explosion. Number three is about understanding the specific nature, or as I call it, the texture of the issue or crisis. This can be mission critical, particularly when scandals centered on character, culture, behavior, and ethics can cause far longer and deeper damage than those centered around operations and capability. So the third question is about whether your approach to scenario planning, training, and simulations arms you with the systems, the process, and the mindset to gauge that texture of the crisis to be able to act more effectively on it. Number four is consequence. Many crisis frameworks focus on the automatic assumption of harm, and that's quite correct. Many crises are indeed damaging. But a crisis properly defined is only ever a point of inflection, as potentially rich in opportunity as risk. So number four is whether you're set up to gauge and assess as fully as possible all the potential consequences, including those that may not be exclusively negative or may not actually have been caused by you. Number five is responsibility and accountability. They're not necessarily the same thing. Responsibility is about understanding the balance of agency and causality. And while accountability can mean contrition, it can sometimes mean, as we saw earlier on, robustly standing your ground when the responsibility isn't yours. So you need to be clear on the difference between your responsibility and your accountability and configured to deliver both. Another article of faith for me is number 6, intent. And there are two types of intent in a crisis. There's what we call strategic intent, which is how do you want the handling of your issue or crisis to be remembered in 6 months' time? And then commander's intent, which is the parameters based on your values that guide every decision, whoever makes it. So the question there is from the earliest stages of your preparedness all the way through to live fire handling, have you established your organizational intent, whether strategic or commander's intent. Nearly there, empathy. Obviously, showing a human face, acting with humility, demonstrating genuine care are a necessary condition. But as we'll see in a second, they are not a sufficient one in their own right. Tony Jakes, probably the dawn of issues management, said in the report's expert commentary section, we can't teach empathy, but we can provide executives with the tools to understand other people's feelings and speak in the first person. So are you training people and running simulations that place authentic empathy front and center as a foundational cornerstone of your mindset, your ethos, and your response? I mentioned that empathy was necessary but not sufficient. When I was at Ketchum, a number of former colleagues are here, we did some research that found that the two crisis behaviors ranked lowest in people's order of importance were empathy and openness. Bear with me. The top two were having a clear plan of action and being clear on the task in hand. And I coined the phrase operationalizing empathy, based on the idea that words alone are not enough. It's concrete action that matters. So as you prepare, have you operationalized empathy so that you can answer the very simple human questions? Do they care? And if so, what are they going to do about it? Number 9 is interaction. In a crisis, it's not just about communication. It's about two-way engagement with those affected. Even the most active listening, purposeful communication, and decisive action risk becoming a self-serving one-way street if there's no real interaction. And this has to be at the heart of what you do. And then finally, continuous learning. As Tony Jakes reminds us, the end of every crisis should be the beginning of preparation for the next one. Not only, he says, can crises arise from issues, but issues can arise from crises. So you have to have active learning, a sort of Kaizen-like commitment to continuous improvement baked in to all of your processes. And here's the kicker. What is the secret sauce that sits at the heart of what I've called the agency cycle? Well, here's the good bit. It's you. Because ultimately, it's data, information, and actionable human insight that are the cornerstone of sense-making and sense-giving across the entire issues and crisis life cycle. Put simply, you hold the key. So to bring us home, as a corollary to the agency cycle, I've also pulled together what I've called achieving balance, a set of yin and yang pairings. If anyone has ever done this brilliant Second City training where they teach you yes and, this is what this is based on. So you need to be involved in sense-making and sense-giving. You fundamentally need to think about reputation, but also relationships. Business continuity and business as usual, but also relationship continuity and reputation as usual. Strategic and commander's intent, a focus on the organizational self and on the other, external and internal, capability and character, an obsession with shareholders and investors, but also a stakeholder-centric mindset. Issues and crisis infrastructure, together with critical human infrastructure, and communications preparedness, as we heard yesterday, alongside whole organization preparedness. In each pairing, both elements matter, but it's the elusive balance between them that makes the difference in creating a response that isn't just about managing the crisis, it's about genuinely shaping outcomes. As Rupert Younger from the Centre for Corporate Reputation at Oxford says in the expert commentary, in our VUCA world, achieving balance is an important leadership superpower. Great leaders, he said, understand that multiple and interconnected agendas require balance. So if you take everything together, I'm going to leave that slide out, what are we left with? So my first provocation is that we need to stop bemoaning the fact that we don't have a seat at the top table. We need to kick down the boardroom door and inhabit a seat that's been earned actively through a substantive approach to issues, crisis, and risk that means we can't not be there when the key decisions are made. We need to assume agency and achieve balance via a central focus on intentional action and purposeful choice as the ultimate drivers of real-world outcomes. Issues and crisis are not linear. It's much more like a game of snakes and ladders. And its agency, assumed early, sustained deliberately, measured properly, and exercised as much on behalf of others as of ourselves, that can shorten the length and the frequency of the snakes and the ladders. It's the balance, that yes and focus, that truly unlocks agency. And finally, I've included a letter to the reader, which this year reminds us that our professional capacity starts in our own backyard. And if you have time and interest to read this report, do so through the prism of your role as a partner, a parent, a neighbour, a friend, and a citizen. And I want to close, 1 minute, 30 seconds. You will doubtless know the Serenity Prayer, originally penned by Reinhold Niebuhr. Where am I going with this? Bear with me. The Serenity Prayer says, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." So as an issues, risk, and crisis communicator, I've had the temerity to rewrite that for what we do, which is grant me the wisdom to know the difference between control and influence, the moral courage and the character to act intentionally on that knowledge early enough to matter, and to do so on behalf of more than just me and my organisation. That is what assuming agency and achieving balance in the age of angst and rage truly means, both professionally and personally. And it's why I believe passionately that our function has never mattered more in helping those that we advise to navigate a world that sadly spikes their and our cortisol on a daily basis before we've even woken up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rod. That was really great. And AMEC is very pleased to be a supporting partner of the research this year. So thank you so much for including it and putting all of that together. It's really, really amazing. We have time for one question. We don't, but we're going to be generous. So we have one question for Rod. If not, I will take the question.
Do it.
Done. So you've been doing this research for several years now. Mm-hmm. What are some of the trends from this year that surprise you more than previous years with the proliferation of AI that you were expecting that you did or didn't see?
The thing that surprises me is how little surprises me, if that doesn't make sense. I knew you were going to ask me a longitudinal question. I think what's interesting, and I said this last year, that maybe with the exception of AI, and it didn't surprise me as it's come up, is that I talked last year about the pressure cooker, that basically the list of risks, the register of risk is relatively stable. AXA said last year that the relative stability of the risks is in itself a call to action. So the buckets of risks are stable, they are becoming ever more intense. So I don't see any major longitudinal shifts. I see a deepening, an intensification, and above all else, and this is the key, an ever greater interconnectedness where all the risks play off and mutually reinforce each other.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And then everyone, call to action is to download the full reports.
Yep, I'll go back, so while you're doing the next thing.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's there.
It'll be in the resources too. Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, that is a great call to action though, to make sure that you do download the full report, because I think you'll find it very interesting to see all of the pieces that Rod's brought together. A round of applause for Rod. Thanks so much for being here. It was a great presentation. We appreciate you.